Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 7:06, O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in here on this Monday morning in the nation's capital. I'm Larry O'Connor, and coming up at 7:35, Mark Chenoweth is going to join us, talk about that bump stock ban that was overturned by the Supreme Court. It's 8:05. I said 7:35 earlier, and I apologize. 8:05 is when Harford County Sheriff Jeff Gowler will join us to talk about the murder of Rachel Morin and how the border is affecting our life up here over 1,000 miles from the border. And at 8:35, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House. Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock. Good morning, Julie.
Good morning.
It's that time at 7 o'clock, and it's time to talk to Joe diGenova, legal analyst and former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Thank you, Joe, for being here as always.
Great to be with you, Larry.
Boy, we're seeing a full court press against, if I may use the pun, the Supreme Court. As you saw Jamie Raskin over the weekend tout his plan with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to rein in the Supreme Court, which I'd love for you to address the constitutional aspects of that. How exactly does the legislative branch rein in the judicial branch if they are co-equal branches of government?
Well, you do it the way Jamie Raskin and the Democrats have been doing it for the last few years, and that's demonize the court, lie about the court, threaten the court, like Chuck Schumer did on the steps of the United States Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. What the Democrats have done is they've targeted, this is Saul Alinsky's tactics put into action. You target your enemy and that you conceive to be your enemy. You demonize them, make it very personal, which is what they've done, and you attempt to destroy and delegitimize them. And right now, the left is being very successful because the right, conservatives, Republicans, are very poor at defending the court.
And of course, the news cycle,
McConnell and everybody else.
Yeah.
Joe, the news cycle is such that in the next 10 to 14 days, we will get a ruling from the Supreme Court having to do with whether President Trump enjoys certain level of immunity from what is being charged for his actions on January 6th. Is this, I'm guessing, a preemptive strike against that? So when the decision comes down, the Supreme Court will have been so undermined and lied about, as you say, that millions of Americans will immediately think that, well, this is just all politics, and the Supreme Court isn't actually looking at the Constitution or the law. They're just trying to help Trump, and it further separates our nation.
Well, so that is certainly the goal of the Democrats and people like Raskin, who is a monumental disgrace to public service. What he doesn't make up, he constructs out of whole cloth. I mean, the guy is really a very, very sick individual. But he's been encouraged by the Democrats, who consider him to be a constitutional scholar, quote unquote. Of course, he's not. He's a constitutional ignoramus. He's basically a thug, a constitutional thug. And he's like a lot of them who say things without knowing what they mean. He's actually an embarrassment. But what they want to do is what you just said, Larry. They want to delegitimize the court ahead of any major rulings. Now, this is where it's important for major news organizations that matter, like the Wall Street Journal and others, to come out, really full bore and not be tepid about this. Because what they're doing by allowing the attacks on Alito and Justice Thomas and others without fighting back and castigating their accusers is they're allowing this to occur. And they've left it to people like me and you and others to defend the court. Where's the American Bar Association defending judicial integrity? Where are they? They're gone. They're absent. Listen, I left the American Bar Association along with my wife, Victoria, during the George W. Bush administration because the way the ABA was treating Bush's judicial nominees. They were lying about them, finding them less qualified than lefty nutsos. But the ABA is AWOL. They've done nothing. They are now complicit in destroying their organization, the thing their organization exists for, by doing nothing. They are an embarrassment. But this is where we are. This is full-scale war against Western civilization and the Constitution of the United States. The Democrats will do anything. If they take over the Senate and the House next time, they will pack the court. They will pack the court.
Yeah.
Joe diGenova is our guest. And Joe, last week, the House of Representatives held Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt because he won't release the the recordings of Joe Biden being questioned by U.S. Attorney at that time Special Counsel Robert Hur, even though they've released the transcript. I'm not quite sure how they have executive privilege over the actual audio of the interview versus releasing the transcript. Is it true that they've given up any executive privilege the second they released that transcript?
Yes, absolutely. This is not about executive privilege. And by the way, what's interesting is it was the Justice Department called the White House and asked them to invoke executive privilege. The White House didn't do that on their own. So this is even worse. But the people, the Republicans in the House have finally got some gumption. Now that the Justice Department has declined to prosecute Garland for contempt because what he did was, quote, not a crime, end quote, the House is going to court to enforce their subpoena for him to produce the documents, which they've had the right to do all along and should have been doing from the very beginning. But now, this will take forever. They'll litigate it. Maybe they'll get the audio recording. Maybe they wouldn't. A judge should order the release of the tape almost immediately. But we have a different United States District Court than we used to. Very anti-Trump, very anti-Republican. And I know some of the judges there are very angry at people like me who say things like that. People like Judge Reggie Walton and Judge Royce Lambert. They're very angry at people who criticize courts. I don't know. Maybe they forgot about the First Amendment. Maybe these judges should go back to school, and they don't understand that people have a right to criticize courts. I don't know where they are. I don't know what happened to these people.
Well, we like you're as usual, Joe. You make all the right people angry. But I was going to ask you, is that the next? Because believe it or not, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but Merrick Garland's Justice Department has issued a very thorough memo explaining why Merrick Garland's Justice Department shouldn't prosecute Merrick Garland for holding Congress in contempt. But does it end there, or is there some next step in the due process here?
Well, the House Republicans are going to court to enforce their subpoena. They can't enforce their contempt in court. All they can do is they can file a motion to hold him in civil contempt, and then he purges himself of civil contempt by releasing the audio tapes. They may take that route. They may take to enforce the subpoena. I'm not sure what they're doing. They haven't done a very good job of explaining it because they never explain anything very well. The other thing they could do is theoretically they could have the House Sergeant at Arms go and arrest him, but they're not going to do that. That's under inherent contempt of Congress, which the Supreme Court says they had the right to do, but I doubt in modern times that the Supreme Court would allow that to stand.
All right, we've got more questions for Joe diGenova, including, you mentioned the Sergeant of Arms. I'd love to get your reaction to this video we've seen of Nancy Pelosi saying, gosh, where was the National Guard? Where were the Capitol Police on January 6th? And whether she can be held civilly liable for Ashley Babbitt's death or other aspects of January 6th and other things that are in the news as well. So we'll keep Joe diGenova for another segment. Maybe I'll even let Julie Gunlock ask a question. It's you know how I am, Julie, with Joe.
No.
It gets very exciting.
WMAL. Making sense of the news.
Live
from the Home Paramount Pest Control Studios.
Home Paramount, the leader in pest control since 1939.
So much truth, you'll hope for traffic so you can hear it all on the Vince Colonnade Show, weekdays 3 to 6, right here on WMAL.
And I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
I take responsibility. Joe diGenova, that's the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, as she was being carted away from the Capitol on January 6th, seemingly completely clueless about where the National Guard was, clueless of the fact that her own Chief of Security and the Sergeant at Arms denied Police Chief Stephen Sund's repeated requests for backup and National Guard, not just days before the events of January 6th, but while the whole thing was going down. Of course, she has not been held accountable for anything that happened on January 6th. What could the criminal or civil ramifications be of this smoking gun video of Nancy Pelosi saying that she takes responsibility?
Well, I think the sad fact is that the legal system properly used provides little remedy against her because of congressional immunity. But there are things that the House should do and should be doing and isn't. If the Republicans take the House and the Senate, what they should do is a clean sweep of the hierarchy of the Capitol Police. For example, Thomas Manger, who is now the chief of police, who came there after Sund was fired has allowed Lieutenant Byrd, who killed Ashley Babbitt, to stay on the force. One of the first things I would do as a new attorney general would be to reopen the investigation of Lieutenant Byrd for the killing of Ashley Babbitt. That's perfectly legal and constitutional. The fact that the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matthew Graves, refused to prosecute Byrd is not a final decision. That can be reopened at any time, and it should be. There should be a murder investigation of Lieutenant Byrd. Thomas Manger, the former chief of police of Montgomery County, should be fired immediately because he has kept Byrd on the police force. That's a disgraceful decision. He's made a number of other decisions, by the way. As far as Pelosi, I think she should be sued civilly. People should take a shot at it because there's no harm in trying to sue Nancy Pelosi and everyone around her who made decisions which led to the fiasco. But there should also be a censure resolution in the House of Representatives. There should be all sorts of things denouncing Nancy Pelosi. And what Victoria always says is when you're presented with a situation like this, ask yourself this question: what would Nancy do? And the answer is Nancy would pounce. And the fact is, Republicans don't know how to pounce. They are embarrassing in their inability to wield power effectively. They've said nothing about any of this. Now, why is that?
Joe, I want to, just in the few minutes that we have left, I want to get your thoughts on the border crisis and the news of this latest murder. Rachel Morin, she was murdered by an illegal that came over the border, escaping a crime. He had murdered a woman in El Salvador and then came over. He is now accused of killing Rachel Morin, who is simply out for a run. And we have heard so many stories like this. In January, obviously, or rather in February, Laken Riley was killed. Just in April, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, Ruby Garcia was killed by an illegal. There are, I could name many, many more examples. I just love your thoughts on the situation, but also this weekend we saw a lot of Democrats out there saying it's a lie that crime is up. It's a lie. Crime is at record lows, which without, of course, mentioning that many police departments aren't reporting crimes to the FBI. So what are your thoughts, and how can people protect themselves when they're not getting accurate information from politicians and government officials?
Well, when the government lies about crime, it really commits a crime. I mean, this is what's wrong. When Christopher Wray, the FBI director, puts out the uniform crime statistics, which he knows are wrong, he should be removed from office. Christopher Wray, first of all, is a fool. Second of all, the people in the FBI know that almost 50% of police departments in the country are not reporting crime statistics to them. So that means these numbers going down are absolutely nothing because they're useless. They're not based on accurate information. Crime is not down, crime is up. You can tell that by the actual statistics. For example, in New York, their murder statistics show 100% more murders than those on the FBI uniform crime reports. That's all you need to know. They're double than what the FBI is reporting. And yet the FBI says nothing about that when it releases the data. As far as the border, I was listening to Wes Moore, the esteemed governor of Maryland, over the weekend, blamed the Republicans in Congress for the fact that there's a border crisis after a woman was murdered by an illegal immigrant let into this country by Joe Biden and Joe Biden's policies. As long as you have politicians like Wes Moore, who is, pretty boy, ignoramus, pretty face, says all the right things. They've got a little book they give him which has all the right phrases in it. He's an absolute moron. And, congratulations, Maryland, on electing a doofus as governor. But they will lie about anything. And they will lie especially about immigration because they're responsible for it. Biden opened the border. He could shut it down today if he wanted to. He's lying about it. He has used all of the policies to allow 12 million at a minimum to come into this country. It's staggering, and there's nothing anybody can do about it until we change the leadership of the country. People have to protect themselves. They should travel in groups. Women should never jog alone. I don't care how safe anybody tells them it is. You cannot jog alone if you are a woman. You simply cannot. And as long as these idiots, these liberals who say, oh, you're perfectly safe, guess what? They're the ones with bodyguards with guns who say it's perfectly safe. They can jog anywhere they want because they've got a security detail. Miss Morin didn't have a security detail. She was killed by an illegal alien that Joe Biden let into this country and didn't deport.
Joe diGenova, former U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia and a good friend of this program. Thank you, Joe, as always. It's always a great Monday with you on board.
You bet, Larry. Thank you.
Now,
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It is 7:36 now. It's O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in on a super busy Monday morning, but we're going to get you going where you need to go, well-informed and entertained in the process, we hope. I always pause there because I think we're entertaining, Julie Gunlock, but you never know. People might say, just get to the headlines. Stop with the critter news.
We're trying.
I don't know. I think we're pretty entertaining. Coming up at 8:05, the sheriff of Harford County, Jeff Goller, who was passionately outspoken against the Biden administration's border disaster leading to the murder of Rachel Morin in his county, and he'll extrapolate on that at 8:05. At 8:35, Newt Gingrich, Speaker of the House. That's Julie Gunlock. I'm Larry O'Connor. This is Mark Chenoweth, president of the new Civil Liberties Alliance. That's the group that Representative Michael Cargill, he's a Texas gun store owner, and you prevailed with the Supreme Court on the whole bump stock ban. So congratulations, Counselor. Well done, you.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it. And by the way, I'm very entertained this morning. I like you guys.
Appreciate that. I was kind of begging for it, but I appreciate you responding. So the Clarence Thomas wrote the majority decision here for 6 justices, the 3 in minority, of course, Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. Did this ruling determine that a bump stock ban in and of itself is unconstitutional and violates the Second Amendment, or was this more about the process in that this was done via regulation in the executive branch instead of through legislation?
Yeah, just what you said there at the end. This didn't have anything to do with the Second Amendment. It wasn't even raised in the course of the litigation. This was just about whether the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms can make something illegal on its own, or whether the job of writing criminal laws needs to be left to Congress.
So
well, that's
and the court
refreshing.
decided it needs to be left to Congress.
So Congress could do this.
The court didn't weigh in on that. Someone might try a Second Amendment objection to it if Congress passed the law. We wouldn't. I think that's an uphill battle. I think most likely, and one of the reasons we know this is Justice Alito in his concurrence suggested that anyone who has a concern about the decision should speak to Congress. I don't think Alito would say that if he was planning to vote with a Second Amendment majority to strike it down.
It should also be pointed out that this regulation pushed through by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms was done under the Trump administration with President Trump's suggestion and encouragement, and we opposed it then, and it's good to see the process play out in this way. But were people harmed in the process? I mean, over the last, 5-6 years now, people have not been able to use these bump stocks or have them. I mean, was there a stay on this decision? Fill me in. I don't remember, but I know that these bump stocks were incredibly useful and beneficial, especially for disabled veterans and just disabled individuals in this country who were able to utilize these to better handle their firearms and defending themselves or for sporting purposes.
Yeah, that's right. And no, there wasn't. There was a very brief stay for about a week in place for one person 5 years ago, but by and large, everyone had to turn in their bump stocks by a certain date in March of 2019, either destroy them themselves or turn them in to the ATF, or face prison sentences up to 10 years if they didn't do that. So now that the Supreme Court has struck down the rule, what we know is that 500,000 people were deprived of about $100 million in property by an unlawful ATF rule that the Supreme Court has now declared unlawful.
It really was amazing. I read some of the decision here, and Sotomayor, in her dissent, continued this idea that a bump stock turns a semi-automatic into a machine gun. She actually wrote that in her. She, when I see a bird that walks like a duck, swims like a duck, quacks like a duck, she said it is a machine gun. Can you just correct her? I know you did during arguments, but can you explain to our audience why a bump stock does not, in fact, turn a semi-automatic gun and rifle into a machine gun?
Sure. I mean, that really blinks reality, because the difference is that you have to bump the trigger or pull the trigger. And by the way, whether you call it a bump or a pull, the trigger moves the exact same distance. The trigger has to be pulled every single time a shot is fired. And it's true that a bump stock reduces the amount of time between activations of the trigger, but it's still once for every bullet fired, as opposed to a machine gun where you just hold down the trigger and you get a stream of bullets.
Well,
the other thing is that...
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, there's two elements, and the court ruled on both of them, so it said we were right about that element. It also said that a bump stock doesn't fire automatically, and the reason for that is that the non-trigger hand also has to provide manual input for every bullet fired, and so it's neither automatic nor firing multiple bullets by a single function of the trigger.
The other thing, and during arguments, the other thing that was amazing to me was some of the justices were saying things like, you can shoot 500 rounds off. And I know you corrected them by reminding them that you have to tell me a little bit about that argument, because I'm seeing this in the media. I'm seeing this repeated, the David Hogg types. But tell us why that's not possible.
Well, first of all, semi-automatic weapons don't come with the same kind of magazine that a machine gun comes with. I mean, you've seen machine guns in the movies, even if you haven't fired one, where you just see this sort of endless supply of bullets being threaded through the gun on a belt, and that's not the way these work. I mean, most of these semi-automatic weapons have much smaller magazines. A magazine of 30 would be a lot for a semi-automatic weapon.
The other tragedy in all of this, I'm glad that this has been corrected. I'm glad that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms have been sort of rightly put back in the place where they belong instead of legislating things like this. And I hope President Trump has learned a lesson here as well, should he assume the office again. But, people thinking back to this Las Vegas mass murder where a person shot multiple, one of the worst mass murders in our history, people at a country music festival. People know about bump stocks because of that, but people forget the name. If you ask who's Stephen Paddock, they won't know, because the actual murderer and his motives and his means of being able to perpetrate that crime are still unresolved and still unsolved to this day. But, let's go after the bump stocks, and bump stocks becomes the big talking point instead of the actual murderer.
It was a really strange situation, too. I mean, this is an individual, and as you say, we don't know, but this is an individual who was an expert with guns. And so, he had something like 14 different guns with bump stocks. By the way, why did he have more than one, Julie? Because he couldn't have fired hundreds of bullets with one. He had to keep switching guns. But, I understand why people are very upset about that. I'm upset about that. No one wants to see people murdered like that. But the way but this law wouldn't have stopped him either. Bump stocks being illegal, he already had lots of illegal weapons, illegal ammunition, things like that. He was not a law-abiding citizen, and this ban wouldn't have stopped him either.
Yes, the mass murder of individuals enjoying a country festival in Las Vegas is a breakdown of the human condition and a broken, sinful, evil human being known as Stephen Paddock. But the moment you see a crime like this, if you start looking at the inanimate object and trying to control that, then you've completely lost sight of what's really wrong here and what's broken. And I would love for us to get back to that point. And again, we still don't know his motive officially. Maybe officials know what the motive is and they won't reveal it and release it. We've seen that, sadly, over the years. But in the meantime, it certainly wasn't the bump stock's fault. And we appreciate you, Mark Chenoweth, and the great work you're doing at the new Civil Liberties Alliance to be able to right this wrong. Well done. Congratulations on the victory.
Well, thank you. It's nclalegal.org if folks want to follow us. And just remember, if this decision had gone the other way, it's not that ATF would have been able to ban other kinds of things without Congress getting involved. Other federal agencies would be able to ban things having nothing to do with guns without having to go to Congress. So this was a bigger decision than just the ATF context.
That's right. They could ban things that are even more dangerous, like gas stoves. Oh, I don't want to think about that. Thanks, Mark. It's 7:45.
Making sense of your world.
Thank you for what you do.
News Talk 105.9 WMAL.
You give me hope.
Yesterday was the Tony Awards, and I want to fill you in on a little bit of what happened during the Best of Broadway presentation last night. You know, the musical Suffs, which is about suffragettes and the victory of the 19th Amendment in 1920 of getting women the vote. It suffered a humiliating defeat last night for Best Musical, along with one of its producers, Hillary Clinton. So, you know, there's a whole lot of losing going on there. Hillary Clinton did appear on the stage, though, and I'd love for you to hear what she sounded like. Here's Hillary.
What a great evening.
Oh, that sustained standing ovation for Hillary.
Now, I have stood on a lot of stages, but this is very special. And I know a little bit about how hard it is to make change. So I'm extremely proud of this original American musical by Shana Taub, now two-time Tony winner.
Yeah.
And of course, it is about some American originals, the suffragists who fought so valiantly for so long to give women in our country the right to vote. It's almost impossible to think about what a challenge that was. But now it's an election year, and we need to be reminded about how important it is to vote. So please welcome.
Yeah, there we go. And then the cast of Sus did their performance. Again, they lost. They didn't win Best Musical. The woman who composed the musical did win for Best Score. By the way, ironically...
Why are you not talking about what she was wearing?
What I wouldn't even know how to describe that.
Why does she wear her bathrobe?
It's
these
giant. It's white.
Like
it's got
Arthur
gold macrame
kind of,
on it.
Yeah, she's really gone into.
I've been
this
told
sort
that
of
it's
style.
petty of me to reduce a woman in politics
come
down
on. That's
to her
that
styling
you were just
choices.
complaining that you were hoping people were entertained. That's the entertainment. She looks terrible. Also, what is the vote for women gotten us, right? I mean, look at this. Like, women are such a disappointment in this country. Not to say we should take it back.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I would subscribe to necessarily.
Well, I know you're not allowed to say that. Fine.
It should be also pointed out. Oh God, the glowing standing ovation she got. I'm watching this. I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not
crying.
in that industry. This is my old industry. I used to work in this industry.
That's so crazy.
By the way, the Tony Awards were presented, and the stage that she was just standing on, Hillary Clinton, was the David Koch Theater. Yes. He's one of those Kochs, one of the evil, horrible, conservative Koch brothers. Well, he donates a lot to the arts in New York, and the theater is named after him, and I sort of appreciated that irony.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
7:54.